everyone, and welcome to another episode of Seed Speaks. My name is Mark Zinkowitz. I'm the editor of Germination Magazine, and I'm happy to be your host today. Now, last week we got to hear from Ashley Robinson and a group of expert panelists who talked to us about the development behind new breeding techniques. This week, we're going to change directions a little bit. There's one thing to keep in mind while breeding, and that's something that's incredibly important: breeding targets. Now, today, to help us talk more about this topic, I have three great panelists. We have Mike Popelka, Hybrid Products Breeding Manager with AgReliant Genetics, Brian Just, Senior Plant Breeder and Sweet Pepper Lead for Cicada Seed America, and last but not least, Hannah Swegarden, Pepper Breeder with Pan American Seed. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Now, I'd like to start off with some very brief introductions, starting with Mike. Mike, would you mind introducing yourself and AgReliant for us?
Yeah, so real quick, my name is Mike Popelka. I'm actually based out of our Mount Hope, Kansas research station, and am the manager of a hybrid product breeding within AgReliant Genetics. AgReliant is a breeding company that is the backbone for our seed brands, which are uh, Pride in Canada, and then LG Seeds and AgriGold within the United States. And I guess my position as manager hybrid product breeding is our group really focuses on making the first commercial combinations or hybrids that enter into our testing pipeline and eventually will fall into a farmer's hands. So,
Mike, can you tell us about yourself and Cicada Seed America?
Yeah, I am Brian
Brian,
Just.
not Mike. My apologies, Brian.
No
Sorry.
problem. Yeah, I'm Brian Just. I have 18 years of experience breeding sweet peppers, and I work for Cicada Seed America, which is a subsidiary of Cicada Seeds Corporation, which is an international company based in Yokohama, Japan. And the company specializes in the breeding and sales of vegetable seed and flower seed varieties.
And Hannah, can you give us some insight into yourself and Pan American Seed?
Yeah, hi, I'm Hannah Swegarden. I've been working as a plant breeder with Pan American Seed for just about 2 years now. Pan American Seed, which recently celebrated its 75th anniversary, is primarily focused on flower, ornamental and cut flower seed. I, however, exist within the 5% of the company focused on developing vegetables. Current vegetable program was established maybe only about 10 years ago, so it's still a relatively young program. And while the company sells flowers globally, vegetable breeding is really just focused on North America at this moment. We have active breeding programs in tomato, pepper, and basil, and a few other side projects that are still in their early phases. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Now let's dive in. Mike, I'm going to start with you. There's this buzzword that I just used a moment ago, breeding targets, and you tend to hear it a lot, but not everyone might be familiar with what exactly it means. Can you explain to us, Mike, what breeding targets are and why they matter for plant breeding in general?
yeah, sure, Mark. I think in general, breeding targets, it's kind of a general purpose word, but when I think of it, and the first thing that comes to mind is, what is your final goal? And that'll lead to your breeding targets. For example, my first customer is the farmer. So, how do we use our global germplasm pool to deliver high performing, diverse portfolios to those farmers? And then my second customer is the ag-reliant, and how do I make those products more efficient, reduce cost of goods? So I think when we're talking about breeding targets, they're actually the measurable and actionable areas of improvement within your product pipeline that can help you improve that final product that's going to your customers. And I want to put a real big emphasis on measurable, because what you incentivize is what you measure, and really what you use for your benchmarks is going to matter when you're talking about those targets. And for example, if we're talking about yield, we can talk about number of hybrids we advance every year, and that's great. But if we don't have checks that we compare to, that target's not really helping us to build forward to the future.
Now, Brian, realistically, what is the big thing you need to keep in mind when starting to think of breeding targets, especially in the vegetable world?
Yeah, Mike hit on it, which is really you gotta keep in mind who your main customers are, and my main customers are also the farmers that we sell the seed to, and I try to put myself in their shoes, and I try to figure like what could I do to offer them a product that's gonna keep them coming back and buying the product year after year. And the number one way to do that is you sell a product that they can grow it, and at the end of the season they have more money in their pocket than they would had they grown another variety. So there's a number of different ways that we can affect that in vegetable breeding. The We talk about, I mean, in row crops you hear a lot about yield per acre, and that's also something that we can manage to use as a breeding target in vegetable breeding. But we also have other knobs we can turn because the growers receive different prices for different products coming off of their farm, and it depends on the product itself or the timing of the product. So we can also increase, something like fruit size, which is going to give them a larger return on their investment, for our seed, or we can give them a variety that matures at a very specific early time slot, and that sometimes allows them to exploit a known kind of supply gap in the pepper pipeline. So it allows them to exploit that and make some more money off of it, because usually those are the times where the product that they sell, which is the peppers, is worth the most. We can also play with quality and everything. And other customers that I have are internal customers, like Mike mentioned, our production teams and our salespeople. And we have to get all of them on board in order to launch a successful variety.
Hannah, I'm curious, do most projects start with targets in mind, or like what happens if you run across something that's interesting that you weren't attempting to find?
Yeah, I can't say all projects start with exactly a cohesive target, but most projects do start with a general concept or a trait that we're interested in. This exists within this product ideation space, and it really involves a lot of dialogue, I think, between breeding directors, the breeders, and maybe some product development and sales team. Not super highly structured process, but it encourages some regular conversation about what's in our nursery and what we plan to do. And then the next step would be that we demonstrate some sort of proof of genetic concept. Can we make this actually happen at the genetic level? I think this is where some things get caught up, or they decide to take a different turn and reevaluate the target. But then if we are able to demonstrate at a genetic level as possible, then we'll start to communicate this across our business units and really integrate product development, sales, and we work together to perform or to develop a product roadmap. And this product roadmap includes things like the business case and solution vision, market estimates, and the breeding scope, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I guess I'll just add that if we do come across something unexpected in this process, in our company is really looked at as a positive thing. It provides an opportunity to discuss our goals or really refocus on what we started to do in the first place. So yeah, we're open to new opportunities.
Now, you all focus on something different. Mike is a corn breeder, Hannah and Brian, you're pepper specialists. I'm sure you all have different goals in breeding. I'm curious how each of you go through and create targets for your specific crop areas. Hannah, I'll start with you this time. How do you go about creating specific targets? Oh, I think you're still on mute, Hannah. One moment.
Yeah, I said
go.
really great stuff there. Now, as a company, I think we're trying to be more methodical about our new introductions and ensuring that each new product really serves a purpose and solves an issue or problem for our customers. So if it's not solving a problem, filling a gap, or really bringing something new, entirely new, novel to the space, then we're going to shy away from active breeding in that arena. So yeah.
Brian, how about yourself? How do you go about doing that?
Well, you cannot do it without spending time in the field and time with your customers. So I do a lot of traveling. I visit all the areas where we grow, where peppers are grown, where our customers are actively growing. And usually I'm visiting those areas with some local salespeople or product development people that really have their finger on the pulse of exactly what's needed at the time. So it comes from a lot. It really, our breeding targets really come from this collaborative effort between the breeding team, the sales team, the product development, and even the customer. We figure out what they need, and then we decide what we can breed for and what we can't breed for, and then we take it from there. And that in that way we can really be sure that we're offering something that has come up in our conversations and things that are going to really help the grower in the end of the day.
And Mike, how about you? How do you go about coming up with specific targets?
I think it's a pretty similar process to what Brian talked about. I mean, we rely heavily on, what the farmer says, what we see from our sales force back into product management, which makes long-term goals for how many hybrids we need to fill a portfolio, and in what holes we have as far as the traits that we may need to fill that portfolio. And then it's all a numbers game. We work backwards. What is our average advancements? How many do we need per maturity to test and advance each year? And then how good is the quality of the hybrid. So we have to have internal and external checks, internally to make sure that we're getting better, externally to make sure we're keeping up with the competition, or at least beating the competition. I think other things you got to think about when you talk about targets is, what are my available resources? They're not infinite. So, where are my strengths and weaknesses? Well, maybe where do I need to focus more of that energy and resources to get more out of for AgriLiant, it'd be their global germplasm pool, and corn. And then the last thing is, how do I measure that success for the target? Are the tools I using accurate, precise? Are the analyses sound? Do we have internal, external checks like I talked about? Is our testing footprint where we want it to be? Are we targeting what products we need to supply the farmer based on our testing footprint? And then I think the last is the year-over-year progress. Are we making progress every year so that we can be competitive in the long term?
Yeah, I'm curious, Mike. Well, while I have you on, I'm sure in corn there are a lot of different targets that you're hoping to hit in varieties. How do you ensure you're hitting those targets, but then also delivering a strong, all-around good quality corn variety specifically?
I think it's part of it comes down to how you make your goals and your targets. I mean, your targets better be aligned with developing that strong all-around corn hybrid. And there's a number of tools and ways to do it. First off, you have to prioritize. What are the most important traits that farmers want? We know yield in corn is the biggest trait, right? But standability, is it emergence, depending on what part of the country you're in. We also need to make sure that we're accessing all the germplasm and diversity that we have. For a number of reasons, we want to make sure we utilize the best inbreeds, no matter where they come from across the world, to create those better hybrids. And I think lastly, the tools that you use, there's so many now that weren't maybe available even 50 years ago, but maybe even 10 years ago. We've got selection indices, we've got decision models, we have thresholds that we can use on trades, and a newer one would be machine learning to help us make sure that we're not missing and that we're fulfilling that all the holes in the portfolio that may exist.
Now, Brian, you and Hannah probably get some great feedback from consumers, I would imagine. I myself enjoy peppers, and maybe there's a certain pepper where I like it a bit hotter. Maybe I want it less hot. Maybe I like the flavor of a particular pepper, but I don't want as much heat or whatever it may be. Brian, how do you ensure your varieties are hardy but maintain that flavor that consumers are looking for?
Yeah, the main part of my work that where flavor is really important is in that snacking pepper segment. In bell peppers, flavor is important, but you kind of want to maintain it within a range rather than really drastically make it better. Or that's desirable, but there's so many other things that we have to do that's not really been a focus of the bell pepper breeding program. But for snacking pepper, it's really important. And there's all kinds of objective ways to measure flavor components. You can measure, sugars and bricks and volatile compounds. and you can objectively measure things like texture. But I have found that the best way to do it, the most accurate way and the most surefire way to come up with something that tastes good is to actually taste it yourself. So I do a lot of actual tasting of my product throughout the development of the breeding. It's actually one of the more fun parts of my job. I really enjoy peppers, so eating them all day long, I still don't get bored. I still enjoy it, and I've been doing it for 18 years. So
That does sound like a fun job. Hannah, I feel like something else that to keep in mind is that, a lot of consumers might not understand a lot of the purpose behind plant breeding, especially in vegetables. As a vegetable breeder yourself, what do you hope consumers keep in mind when they look or eat varieties that you've worked on?
I think there's a couple points that like extend beyond just vegetable breeding, but the fact that breeding is a time-intensive endeavor. It can take years to get a product to market. So just being appreciative of the time it takes, and the fact that especially in some of my work, we're trying to cater to diverse markets, which can prolong and complicate the time to release. But then I also would love if it stays in folks' minds that all of our breeding is the result of work performed by so many different people, and it's shaped by multiple sources of feedback. And it can be way more decentralized than just the breeder making decisions. And I think maybe the most important thing that I hope people remember is that when we're breeding, we're really hoping that we are breeding to provide diversity of options for consumers. And so ultimately, we want our end consumer or home gardener to feel proud of what they're growing and eating, and then share that pride and that passion with their family and friends. So I think that's the major takeaway I hope we leave with our products.
And Hannah and I'm going to ask this question to all three of you, but starting with Hannah, is there ever any room in your programs to be flexible while breeding and pursue certain traits that might surprise you or anything like that? I know you have to breed for very specific purposes, but is there sometimes some wiggle room that's like, oh, hey, maybe we can kind of go head down this road and explore that? Do you ever get the opportunity to do that?
Yeah. I'll be honest, like I'm still relatively new to industry. And I think one of my major concerns was that I'd be really streamlined or siloed into specific targets. And the arena and the company I work for is really quite flexible and open to pursuing traits that we might not have expected to see. Almost all the breeders of Pan American seed have some freedom to pursue opportunities outside of their primary targets. And we're always looking for unique crossing opportunities, interspecifics, intergenetics, things like that, or ways to use some advanced technology to really branch out during the breeding process. We're given 10% of our time to pursue related side projects and really make the most of the germplasm that we have while we're still working toward our breeding specs.
And Brian, how about you? Do you ever get to head down a different avenue once in a while?
Yeah, I mean as Hannah mentioned, it's and Mike, it's a long-term prospect, and you have to be thinking many years into the future, decades into the future in some cases. And so you have to have a lot of things started that might not be considered important or valuable right now. You have to have a lot of like little things started. So that's another really fun part of the job, is getting involved in some of that stuff. And sometimes the need pops up and you've got something already started, and you started it 5 years ago. So you're 5 years ahead of your competition. You have to limit how much stuff you do like that, because it can easily overtake a program. But having small projects that are interesting to the breeder, it's a really important part of running a successful breeding program.
And how about you, Mike? I'll throw that question at you before we take a question from the audience.
Yeah, I think you have to be flexible. I mean, with AgReliant, we're selling coast to coast in North America, so I mean, there's a very dynamic environment within the U.S. Corn Belt, and I would say a recent example would be tar spot. I mean, it hit the U.S. market and was extremely devastating to farmers, especially around Lake Michigan, and we recognized it as a company early. Breeders took it upon themselves to begin to take opportunistic plots. We had a lot of testing in that area. So, having that white testing helps. We had boots on the ground. We identified within our germplasm a lot of tolerance to the disease. And so we were very, very quickly able to, I would say, be flexible in how our pipeline went to make sure that we brought those hybrids to market. And I think it's made a big difference for farmers in those areas. I mean, it's always, the end goal is always to make sure that you have developed several choices for the farmers, and that you don't get caught going down that narrow alley.
Before we wrap up for the day, question from the audience, actually it's to Mike specifically, but I'll throw it out to all of you. Mike, to you, what are the 3 most important traits in corn breeding in your opinion?
So that's a tricky question because it depends what part of the country you're in, right? I've bred in Kansas and I've bred up in South Dakota, and if you were in Kansas, I'd say green snap's important besides yield. Standability is important at the end of the year where the corn will go dry, and of disease tolerances, that you don't have to put fungicides on. Now, if I was up in South Dakota, emergence would be a big one with those colder soils. So I think it really matters where you are. But, I think standability besides yield is definitely the number 2 on most farmers' list.
Brian, when it comes to peppers, what for you are some of the most important traits?
Well, a lot of vegetable breeding tends to be very cosmetic. People buy with their eyes. You actually go to the grocery store and you see the product and you pick it or you're drawn to it. So a lot of those traits are really important, like how it appears, the size, the color, the glossiness of it, the uniformity of the shape. After yield, those would be probably the most important things. And then also disease resistance. We do a lot of work to create varieties that are resistant to diseases that will limit the growers' reliance on pesticides.
Hannah, I'll give you the final word.
I guess I would echo what Brian said in that, especially within some of my breeding work, we're really focused on what's gonna catch a consumer's eye at a garden center, or what they're going to want to grow in their backyard to show their friends. And so we do look for cosmetic traits, not just like within the fruit, but for example, I'm also looking into like variegated pepper types, which can provide a little bit more of an ornamental perspective for home gardeners. Another important trait within our breeding program is thinking about small spaces and thinking about compact and dwarfing habits. So we recently launched a Kitchen Minis program, which the end goal is that consumer can buy a potted plant and have it on their counter and harvest some produce for an extended period of time. And so thinking about our changing urban environments, balcony growing, and just small spaces is another kind of breeding target that we have within our program.
Quick question for Brian that just came in. Actually, I'm not familiar with this term. Brian, maybe you can shed some light on it for us. Brian, are you also working on parthenocarpic peppers?
Yeah, parthenocarpies have been a big thing lately, because it's related to the possibility of breeding seedless peppers. So I think all pepper breeding operations right now are considering parthenocarpy and how it might play into developing seedless product. Because the parthenocarpy, what the term actually means is the ability to form a fruit without having seeds inside of it. So a lot of peppers, if they don't pollinate, the flower just aborts and falls off the plant. But some varieties have the tendency that even if it doesn't pollinate and there's no seed developing inside, there will still be a fruit formed. So I think most sweet pepper breeding operations that are considering seedless peppers are doing some work with parthenocarpy. It's a great question.
Learn something every day. I was not familiar with that term. So thank you very much, guys, for your time today. That's all the time we have today. It was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much, Mike, Brian, and Hannah. You've definitely taught me something today, and I hope everyone in our audience took home some fun knowledge today. If you liked this topic, make sure to tune in next week. I myself will have the pleasure of hosting Seed Speaks again. I will be introducing the 2023 winners of the Canadian Plant Breeding Innovation Scholarships. So stay tuned for that. Again, Mike, Brian, and Hannah, have a great day. And thank you to our audience for spending at least part of your lunch hour with us. Have a great day, everyone.